All right, so let's get nerdy. Okay, so when we are talking wrists, anatomically, okay, and I'm going to speak anatomically, that's the way I learned this. This would be a neutral wrist position right here, okay? This would be flexion, okay? Flexion in golf terms, we call this bow, okay, neutral. This would be extension, and extension, okay, we call this cup in golf terms, right? Okay, so we've got neutral, we've got flexion or bow, we've got extension or cup, okay? Then in this direction, okay, if I go down, so like pinky down, this would be ulnar deviation, okay? And it's called that because the ulna is this, there's two forearm bones. The ulna is the one that lines up with the pinky. That would be the ulna, so this is ulnar deviation. The top forearm bone, one that lines up with the thumb, that's the radius. So this would be radial deviation, okay? So those are the main movements that the wrist is capable of doing, and the ones that we're typically talking about when we're analyzing wrist motions. So obviously we've got two hands, we've got two wrists, so there's sort of a combination of how they're working in a sort of a relationship. So what we want to understand is really what's happening in this motion. When we grip the golf club, we are gripping the golf club with an extended or cupped left wrist. We have some radial deviation, okay? We have some, what some people just call hinge. We have some of that radial. With that right hand is going to be in also a slightly extended position, okay? That right wrist is going to have less of that radial deviation, okay? So that right wrist is probably going to sit in more of a neutral position. Now, as we get moving, as the club starts to work back, as we've discussed, this initial part of the takeaway, as we're working from address into here, there's really not a whole heck of a lot of change that goes on in the wrists, okay? The wrists stay fairly quiet. But as we start to load, and you'll often hear me talk about this, I like to term that motion from this width in the takeaway up into here, I like to term this more as loading rather than like a wrist cock or a wrist hinge. Okay, typically when people are talking wrist hinge, they end up doing way too much with this left wrist and get that left wrist in a super extended position, which obviously plays into effect with how this face opens up. So what I'd much rather is us think about the idea of width and a fairly quiet wrist pattern to here. As we're working from here and we're working upward, we want to start to get into a loaded position, okay? So what's going to happen with this right wrist is this right wrist is going to be gaining extension. It's also going to gain some more radial, so it's going to gain some of this one, thumb up, okay? So it's gaining that. That left wrist is actually working more from the initial position of extension or cup, and it's going to be working more into more of a neutral, okay? Now in your case, as we've discussed, it actually benefits you to feel more into flexion, into bow, okay? That really helps the golf club in the sweet spot behave in a shallower pattern, so you gain benefit from this, okay? I don't tell everybody to do this because not everybody needs it. Some people transition the golf club differently, but for you, this is a benefit, okay? So for you, it's a benefit to feel the width, and as you work up, you're feeling more of that, okay? That will get the golf club into a slightly stronger position, and it'll keep the golf club working in a shallower pattern, keeping it behind the hands coming down, okay? So that's really the main thing that we need to be aware of, is that if we can understand how the wrists move and the movements that would cause harm, like for you, I wouldn't want us getting into a position where we start seeing too much of this, okay? Too much of this left wrist extension. It's gonna open the face up too much. It's gonna cause you to get a lot steeper coming down. Nothing good, okay? The only time that you're going to want to be feeling more of that is if we're hitting some really, really soft shots around the greens. We might want to have a little bit more of that, okay? But for the most part, when it comes to hitting full shots, we don't need it, okay? So hopefully this makes sense and was just nerdy enough that it made sense and helps you on the right track. We'll talk soon.